Yo, Xnel here, and today we got the Ruby guide. We finally have access to the test server, so big shoutouts to the TOFPH team for providing me access to this test server. Disclaimer though, the Ruby gameplay shown in this video is going to be an A6 Ruby. However, that does not affect everything else I say. Everything I say in this guide is information that is still applicable to A0 Ruby. So before we go into her matrices and her team comps, we have to start with the key things you have to know about Ruby. First thing you have to know about Ruby is her dodge attack. She throws a dolly right there. That thing actually taunts enemies. And not only does it taunt enemies, it will group up enemies. It's not a slow pull towards the center. It will group enemies literally instantly. Oh. That was not a good example. See, it groups them up instantly, and it's so useful, and that alone can be enough of a reason to pull for Ruby. And in tandem with that dodge attack, her trait actually buffs Dolly. It makes it so that enemies within 5 meters of Dolly take 8% more flame damage, and then you also get 12% flame attack for 12 seconds. So that's effectively a buff of 8% flame damage and 12% flame attack for yourself. This is really good, especially since you are going to be using Ruby in a flame team. She will also have the flame resonance. I apologize that this is still in Chinese, but this is the test server that they gave me for global. This is not the CN version. And do take note that her shatter and charge is unchanged. She still has 11.5 shatter and 8 charge on the global version. Now let's talk about her burn capability. She, of course, just like any other flame weapon, can apply burn on their first attack when other weapons are fully charged. But she also has an on-demand burn capability, meaning you can apply burn whenever you want. And you can do that by doing 2 normal attacks and then holding down the button, and she will do that imprisonment cage, which applies burn to a single enemy. So if you're running Cobalt B on A3, you can apply an Ion Scorch to enemies with Ruby's burn. The downside of this hold attack is that it's only for single target. It's great in boss fights, but don't expect to burn hordes of enemies. Her skill is a 30 seconds cooldown damage burst that also slows enemies' movement and attack speed. It shoots out this sparky cube that bounces between enemies and also bounces off of you if you touch it. So you can gain more value out of this skill by being aware of the position of the sparky cube and making sure it bounces back to the enemy. And that's pretty much all the key things you need to know about Ruby. She doesn't have any overly complicated mechanics. She's just a straightforward damage dealing, laser shooting little bundle of destruction. That also means that she feels like a complete character at A0. There's no pressure to pull for more dupes because there's no huge mechanic she unlocks from advancements. Advancements 1 and 6 will increase your basic attack damage and reduce the cooldown of your skill. While it feels good to be able to use the skill more often, it is not necessary. A5 gives more utility, but it's a very high investment and not really worth it. So yeah, A0 Ruby is great. On to the recommended matrices. Of course, if you're a whale, the 4-piece Ruby set is the way to go, no questions asked. But for F2P and small spenders, if you're going to use her as your shatter unit, which is generally the case, then the staple shatter configuration will work, which is the 2-piece King and the 2-piece Shiro. While she is recommended to be your shatter unit, you can still run her as a DPS if you really want to, and if you do that, then her recommended matrices is of course the classic 2-piece Samir and the 2-piece Crow. If you're at the point where you still don't have the 2-piece set SSR matrices, then you can go for the SR 3-piece Sobek. Now let's get to team compositions. So Ruby in most team compositions will be the shatter unit. You can also use her as a main DPS if you have a different shatter unit in mind. She will work well in both roles. The recommended pair up with her is definitely Cobalt B. You can switch their roles if you prefer, either one being the shield breaker and the other being main DPS, but you definitely want Cobalt B in there. If you don't have Cobalt B, then King or Huma are your other options, as they will benefit from the flame resonance. So if you use King, then most likely she will be your shatter unit, then Ruby can transition into a main DPS role. For Huma, it's really up to preference. You can use Huma as your shatter or your charge. It depends on you, whichever playstyle you like better. For the third slot, Claudia at A1 is the recommended damage buffer. Tsubasa at A3 can also work. You will just have to manage your dodge charges better, as Ruby will use it for her dolly throw and Cobalt at A3 will use it to apply Iron Scorch. With Claudia at A1, you don't really have to think about the dodge charges and just use your skill and you get the damage buff. The other option is, instead of going for a damage buffer on your third slot, you can also go for any support character. Could be Zero, Coco Ritter, or Nemesis, whichever you feel comfortable playing as or have high advancements of. Another way to build a team with Ruby is to use Zero for the Flame Resonance. So you got Ruby as your Shatter unit and then Zero as your support. That way you can use any other element for your main DPS, like Samir.
Helicopter, helicopter!
So those are my recommended team comps. Let me know in the comments if you have any other team recommendations, or if I missed anything in here, or if there's something you disagree with. I'd love to know. I do read all the comments. So yeah, Ruby doesn't really need a long guide. She's a very straightforward character in my opinion, and I believe this covers most of it. I hope you guys found it valuable, and if you did, really appreciate it if you hit that like for the YouTube algorithm, subscribe, you know, all that good stuff. And I'd like to invite you to join our Discord community at discord.gg/xfam for all Tower Fantasy stuff, other anime games, gaming, anime in general. Thank you, and I'll see you around.